And it's okay if a sailor skips the chain of command if it means that it's going to save their life. And it's okay for things to go against the grain every once in a while. Sometimes it's needed, sometimes it is necessary, because doing things the same way, knowing that they're not working, will never change anything. And I think a lot of the military is so stuck in this like idea of tradition and doing things the same way. And there's nothing wrong with tradition. Some traditions can still be upheld while still considering other people, but some traditions just need to flat out go away.
Welcome to Your Story Doesn't End Here, the mental health podcast of military and veterans who refuse to be silenced. I'm your host, Rachel, and my mission with this podcast is to be a voice for those who don't have a voice, bring awareness to mental health issues, provide value and solutions, and to change the culture when it comes to mental health within the DoD organizations.
Hey everyone, it's Rachel. Happy Memorial Day. Happy Memorial Day weekend. I hope that each and every one of you took some time to reflect on the people that have lost their lives in the military, not only serving on the war front, but those who lost their lives to the battle in their mind. And we know there's still hundreds and hundreds of them every single year. And that's what we fight to change. But we honor those who lost that battle, and they'll never be forgotten. And so I wanted to do an episode in honor of Memorial Day and in honor of those who lost their lives to suicide. And so with that, really just wanted to take some time to not only reflect, but also just talk about a few things. And one of them being the legislation that the military is putting out that directly affects mental health in the military, but also talking about a few things in the past that I have suggested to the MCPON with the petition that I put out back in 2019. So just kind of getting into it as usual. When I do my solo episodes, everything's just kind of on the fly. I just kind of talk about what comes to mind. And so, first of all, this podcast in general is in loving memory of everyone that I lost to suicide when I served, everyone that I served alongside with that continues to die from suicide. And I have lost people since I've been out of the military, and it breaks my heart every time. And realistically speaking, even if I don't know the person, it still breaks my heart because I know that majority of the suicides in the military could have potentially been prevented. I know we can't save everyone. Even if we had a perfect world where mental health wasn't stigmatized, you're always going to have the outliers. And that's unfortunate. But I definitely wanted to acknowledge that this podcast, Your Story Doesn't End Here, it is always and always will be dedicated to those who lost their lives to suicide and those who are still struggling with mental health. And so if you listen to this, I want you to know that you are seen, you are heard, that there are people fighting for you, and that, we are pushing so hard for changes so that the military is a better environment for everyone who serves. So with that being said, I want to talk about the Brandon Act. And I've been wanting to talk about this since I heard about it actually getting implemented. I remember a few years back when the incident happened with Brandon, and it was incredibly heartbreaking to me because that was the perfect example of how bad mental health can be in the military. And so I am actually going to pull up the story of what happened with Brandon, because I recognize that not everyone knows what happened with Brandon. And so, like I said, I'm on the fly here. So let me see if I can find the story. Okay. So this is a CNN article, and I don't know if it tells the entire details, but this CNN article, it was released this year. So okay. So one of the things that sticks out to me in this article is that when Brandon notified his commanders that he was depressed, they took no action. They showed no sympathy. And they said, suck it up and get back to work. And that right there is like the epitome of mental health in the military. And if I understand correctly, he left a suicide note, and that was really what pushed for the change. What's interesting to me as I scroll through this article on CNN is that it said the Pentagon would review recommendations closely, and that this brigadier general said, well, he's the Pentagon press secretary. He said, even one suicide's too many, and we will exhaust every effort to promote the wellness, health, and morale of our total force. Yeah. I'm not trying to laugh in like a condescending way. I think what bothers me when I read stories like this, and I'm still trying to find his actual story, probably should have been prepared, but what bothers me is that I think the Brandon Caserta story, the reason why it created change in the military is because it was bad press for the military, because the family really, really made a big deal about it. And I absolutely have the utmost respect for the family for pushing for mental health change, because it's needed, and it honors his life in an incredible way, because he will always be remembered now for the change that he was able to help create in the military. And so I absolutely honor him for that. And in this Memorial Day, he absolutely comes to mind as one of those people that lost their life to suicide because the military failed to take care of them. But it bothers me that it has to take something that drastic for the military or the government to be like, oh, let's do something because this is bad press. So I'm still trying to find his story, and I might not be able to find it, but I am finding a lot of really, really good points that point directly to the mission of changing mental health in the military. And I encourage you, if you don't know his full story, and if you haven't read about what an incredible person he was and what he faced in the military, I encourage you to look him up. I can include a few articles in the show notes if you want to be pointed in the right direction. But there's a military.com article that talks a lot about the toxic leadership that he experienced. And I say all the time on this show how I truly believe that mental health and leadership are correlated with each other. And if the military took more time to instill better leadership principles into their sailors, their Marines, their soldiers, their airmen, that alone would do wonders, absolute wonders for the military and for the culture. And so that's why when I see people that are higher up that are talking about how they care and how one suicide's too many and we're going to do everything they can, well, you're not doing everything you can, because when you're doing everything you can, you're taking all the suggestions and you are taking all the data and you're implementing something. And I've seen how fast the military can implement things. Like if you remember a few years back, they changed the Navy rates. I don't know how long that was in the works for, but when everyone was in uproar, they changed it back right away. It literally took like a few weeks. So the bullshit excuse that things take time, that's not enough for me. So I can't find any article that is showing exactly what happened, but I'll put it in the show notes. I'll see if I can find it. I'll put it in the show notes. If I remember correctly, I believe he walked out onto the flight line into rotating helicopter blades. Don't quote me on that because it's been a few years and I don't exactly remember, but I know that it was something absolutely tragic. And that's honestly why I believe they're pushing for legislation now. So it's a double-edged sword, right? Like it's a good thing because they're pushing for legislation and it's honoring the memory of an incredible human being. But at the same time, the military, it's really a slap in the face from the military too and the higher ups because it's like, okay, you guys could have done something years ago and you could still do more things, but it's just not enough. And that's just me speaking as a mental health advocate, knowing that it's still not enough. But so the Brandon Act, I'm actually on the defense.gov article right now, and I'm reading what the Brandon Act is. And it's a law that creates a self-initiated referral process for service members seeking a mental health evaluation and aims to reduce stigma by allowing them to seek help confidentially. Now, what are the pros about this and what are the cons about this? So the pros, and this is just from obviously reading this small bit about this article, the pros is that it's a step in the right direction. It's supposed to be making the military feel like there's someone in the higher up government that cares. The cons to it, and it's sad to say, but from my personal opinion, I really feel like with the Brandon Act that the cons, there's more cons there than pros. And I hope that I am wrong. I hope that this proves me wrong and that people can get the help that they need. But the biggest issue here is that the stigma stems from the culture of the military. And I truly feel like nothing's really confidential in the military because it is such a like tight-knit environment that everyone usually knows everything unless you like keep your mouth shut completely. But then, if we're talking about reducing a stigma, then the stigma is that I shouldn't have to, if I'm serving active duty, keep my mouth shut completely because there shouldn't be a stigma there in the first place. So it's like this weird, toxic circle. And I hope I'm making sense when I say that. But we'll see what happens with the Brandon Act. And if you're active duty and this is something that you are able to directly experience and take part in, it sounds like they're slowly implementing it into the military's process, but let me know. It looks like it's saying the DoD policy directs the secretaries of military departments to establish policy, assign responsibilities, and provide procedures for service members to request a referral for a mental health evaluation through a commanding officer or supervisor. Okay, well, that right there seems like an issue because what happened to confidentiality? The new process allows service members to seek help confidentially for any reason at any time and in any environment and aims to reduce the stigma associated with seeking mental health care. Yeah, I'm not a fan. I'm going to read more about it. I hope that isn't it, what I just read, because that is a very inside the box solution. And if you want my honest opinion, I don't think that that's going to change much unless the leadership is fixed. So we'll see. But that being said, I wanted to go back a couple of years to some suggestions that I sent to the MCPON, Russell Smith. He's not the MCPON anymore, but when I created my petition to him in 2019, I had done extensive research, extensive over like, I don't know, 2-3 weeks. So extensive enough, I guess. But talking to so many different members of the military. I talked to reservists, I talked to active duty, I talked to officers, I talked to enlisted, I talked to people who had newly joined, I talked to people who had been in for years. And I asked, like, if you could change something about the military mental health system, what would you suggest? What would you do? Tell me about your experiences. And I was just flooded with messages and comments and DMs just telling me like, hey, on a boat, in a boat environment, this is what would help. In a reservist environment, this is what would help. So I was able to kind of categorize things into what I felt like was a digestible document to send to the MCPON to say, hey, like, listen, you're never going to hear from the lower enlisted and the lower junior officers what needs to be changed, but I just heard from them and this is what is being suggested. So I'm going to read to you this document and we can talk a little bit about if anything's changed, if we think anything's changed from, what I suggested back then, if maybe those suggestions shouldn't be suggestions anymore. If maybe we're in a different time in life and those wouldn't help anymore. But actually, I haven't read this document myself in a few years. So it's good to reflect on this stuff. So the suggestions here. I have a few bullet points under suggestions. It says yearly required checks for mental health. Treated like everything else, incorporate into PHA. A routine mental health check should be viewed no different than basic medical or dental readiness. I totally agree. Second bullet point, if an MTF cannot provide mental health services within a week, immediate referrals out in town should be arranged. While I understand that is not always possible, maybe setting up some kind of triage service to ensure sailors are getting the best help possible would be the best option in the meantime. Agree. Mental health questionnaire should be worded in a manner that creates a more comfortable environment for those answering the questions. Instead of asking, in quotes, do you want to harm yourself or do you want to harm others? Feedback suggested questions that are more relevant, such as, have you experienced overwhelming feelings of not being in control? Or in the last year, have there been days where you could not bring yourself to get out of bed? Agree. And I think a lot of those questionnaires, as a side comment, I think a lot of those questionnaires are like from the medical field. So I don't know that it would be super easy to just change the questionnaire, but I feel like maybe the military could create their own. I don't know. Next bullet point, use of tele mental health for units too small or unable to have mental health available. I think this was slightly implemented because of COVID, the tele whole thing. It doesn't work well for everyone, but for some people it does. So I think that kind of halfway got checked, but not because the military was trying to implement something. I think more because of COVID. And then the last bullet point under suggestions is ensuring that commands are not involved in a negative manner when it comes to mental health appointments. Concern was expressed about commands canceling fleet and family appointments because they need the sailor present at work and the issue of privacy for appointments within a command. Many times leadership will pry into what appointments are for and become upset with a sailor for taking too long at an appointment, which can make it harder for a sailor dealing with issues. Again, this goes back to the training aspect. And then that's when the document goes into training specific suggestions, where I had 2 bullet points. The first is that suicide prevention become as big of a program as the SAPR program. There's a huge lack of training, and training that is given focuses so heavily on bystander intervention. Feedback from sailors that contacted me expressed that commands are making it almost punitive if a bystander did not take steps to help or recognize signs. However, we're not providing that appropriate training. And the second bullet point says that training of leadership, specifically E6 and above, some members of the Navy still have the old school mentality and others just don't know how. So I agree with both of these. I think that honestly, in my entire 6.5 years served, I don't really remember any specific suicide prevention training. I think the military needs to up their training for that specifically. I know that I attended one that I volunteered to attend, but there was nothing that was required. But then, that goes back to like what's going to be effective, because the whole death by PowerPoint, not effective. So those were the training specific suggestions. And then I outlined some concerns. The number one concern is that PHAs for some sailors are completely impersonal. Concern was expressed about providers not following up at all if there are no red flags on the questionnaire. And other concerns were expressed about PHAs being completed over the phone or with very new corpsmen straight out of A school. What's interesting to me, and this is another side note, is I had asked a friend who was a corpsman one time, like if you go to an appointment and they say, do you feel safe at home? And obviously the patient answers yes or no. I asked my friend, what if they say, no, I don't feel safe at home. What do you do? And my friend was like, I don't know. We weren't trained on that. That is a problem. That is a huge, huge, massive problem. So I'll leave you at that. Next bullet point under concerns, mental health care questionnaires are extremely impersonal. Providers should take the time to talk to patients face to face and ask questions about how they're doing. I'm going to add to that. This isn't obviously in this document, but I'm going to add to that these conversations between a provider and a patient, they should be personal anyway. It shouldn't just be sitting down, but I always felt like when I went to medical in the Navy that it was always like a clipboard conversation. Like they just came in and it was like, all right, check the box. All right, I feel safe at home. Yep. Okay, cool. How about this? How are you feeling today? All right, cool. Next person will be in. And that was it. There are very, very few doctors, and this is even civilian side, but I think the civilian side does a lot better job than the military. Very few doctors that I felt like actually gave a shit when I went in for my appointments. And I think when you're already in a vulnerable position, in a vulnerable state of seeing a doctor anyway, or seeing a corpsman or, anything medical, treating it like it's just another check in the box, even though there are patients to see and there are things to do. And yes, it's busy. And yes, people are understaffed, but treating it like a check in the box will never, ever, ever allow someone to appropriately open up. And I go back to that first appointment that I had at Naval Health Clinic, Oak Harbor. And I told the corpsman that I had anxiety. And the first words out of his mouth were, "You can't be in the Navy with anxiety." Like, how the hell am I supposed to open up to you about anything when that's the first words coming out of your mouth? So anyway, that's just kind of expounding on that bullet point, but I'll read the last couple of bullet points here under concerns. The next one was that the process of mental health care from the first phone call / office visit is impersonal. If I were to walk into an emergency room with my legs severed, I would get immediate attention and would be treated with compassion. My personal experience walking into mental health was an environment that made me feel like the corpsman behind the desk did not care about me. They did not care if I was seen. They did not ask if I was safe or okay. They did not refer me to Fleetwood Family, the chaplain, or any other resources when I could not be seen in a timely manner. The people who work in a mental health facility need to understand that some, if not majority of the people who walk through their doors are broken. And while it can't be physically seen, they need to treat every patient the same way they would treat someone who walks in with a severed limb. Next bullet point. There is no sense of urgency for mental health care until sailors reach the point where they are suicidal and express those ideations. Next bullet point is lack of staffing, i.e. aircraft carriers that only have one psych doctor and no overlap and turnover, causing a backup in appointments when that doctor transfers. And last bullet point is sailors weigh getting help for their mental health against their careers. And many are deterred from getting help because they feel it will negatively impact their careers. On this note, and this is part of the document, that is why for some it is easier to talk to a provider out in town compared to another member of the military or someone on a military base. So side note on this, I remember when I went to a town hall on the base, and I had brought up how incredibly difficult it was to get an appointment out in town. And a representative from TRICARE told me that it's because the military likes to take care of their own. So my question is, if I was able to get an appointment out in town, and keep in mind, I was willing to drive up to an hour, 2 hours away to find a provider who could accept me that week, who accepted TRICARE, because I was so desperate for help. And the base didn't want it to happen. Obviously, I was able to find help in town by pulling some teeth and strings and whatever, but they created all this red tape and these hoops to jump through that made it harder because they felt like they needed to take care of their own. And I want to talk about this mentality because when sailors are dying, when soldiers are dying, when airmen, Marines are taking their lives because they can't go get the help that they need, that's not taking care of your own. In fact, that is failing every single person that needs help the most. And I think a lot of it's a pride thing. Obviously, if more people are going out in town and the numbers are higher, it looks bad. And it goes back to this like PR and looking bad thing. But, people say this all the time on the show. I say this all the time on the show. The people are the asset in the military. And if the people are not there, the military cannot function. I probably would have stayed in the military longer had it not been such a toxic environment. And I know multiple other people who choose the same. The number of people that I see online every single day that are like, you know what? When I weighed the pros and cons of getting out of the military, I chose me and I chose my mental health. So if mental health were better, the military force would probably be a lot stronger and a lot better, but we don't think like that for some reason. Not the last thing on here, but one of the last things that I put on here was I did put some comments and I put the sailors seem pleased with the MCPON in San Diego that has been set up and suggested it be more widely available throughout all installations. I don't know if that has been implemented at other installations, and I would be curious to know. It was like a mental health walk-in clinic that San Diego had implemented, and the MCPON had referred back to this walk-in clinic when he sent me a response a few years back. But I'm curious to know if that actually continued and how that's going for other installations if it did. And then I'm not going to read it on here, but I had two different stories that I shared, one from a reservist and one person who was active duty. The active duty story was, I kid you not, 3 pages, three and a half pages long, because I wanted the MCPON to hear from someone who had gone through it. I wanted him to hear the pain that people are going through by not getting the help that they need. And I hoped that that would be enough. And obviously, I don't know everything that's going on every second of the day in the military. I know some installations are, implementing things and some aren't. Unfortunately, the one that I live right next to, I have heard nothing. But the installation's also very, very hush hush about things. And so I try to talk to people that are on the base and figure out what's going on. And every time I talk to people, it's the same story. Things aren't any better. What I see online, they're still hiring social workers. And I hope to be able to make a difference so that things can change, because sometimes the people making the decisions, if they haven't been there in all walks of life, they're not going to know the solutions. And obviously, when an O10 is talking to an E1, they're never going to get those solutions, because a lot of these, like open, what are they called? They're called like captain's call or something. I don't remember the exact verbiage for what it is, but a lot of those things where, like you got the room full of people and then like the CNO or someone's up on stage, a lot of those are very, very scripted. And I remember when they would send like 3 or 4 sailors from a command to go talk to the CNO. I use the CNO as an example because I went to one with the CNO. And before we went there, they're like, all right, make sure you bring questions, but let me see the questions ahead of time to make sure that they're appropriate questions. And I didn't vet my question through the CNO. And goodness, I don't remember exactly what it was that I asked. I think it was something about CBD. But the certain commands and certain chains of commands, they get very embarrassed when like certain questions are asked because they feel like it makes them look bad. And again, it goes back to pride, right? Like, it's okay if a sailor is outspoken, and it's okay if a sailor skips the chain of command if it means that it's going to save their life. And it's okay for things to go against the grain every once in a while. Sometimes it's needed, sometimes it is necessary, because doing things the same way, knowing that they're not working, will never change anything. And I think a lot of the military is so stuck in this like idea of tradition and doing things the same way. And there's nothing wrong with tradition. Some traditions can still be upheld while still considering other people, but some traditions just need to flat out go away. And sometimes the way of doing things just needs to change, and it needs to be completely overhauled for the greater good. And so, this Memorial Day, I would like to leave you with this reflection of looking at the way that things are around you, and looking at the people around you, the processes around you, the way that things are done, and figure out if that is working. And if it's not working, if it's hurting someone in some way, even one person, figure out the way to change that. Get feedback from those around you. Have the conversations. Put your pride aside. And sometimes that feedback, sometimes the feedback that you get, it hurts to hear. But that's how we start to change the culture, is we listen to those around us. We listen more than we talk. And in listening more than we talk, we hear the things that we can never hear because we were talking too loudly to hear the things that need to be heard to start taking that step towards change. So I hope you guys got some value from this episode today. I don't know if I've ever shared that letter publicly that I sent to the MCPON, but you know, starting with training and starting with culture and picking somewhere and implementing things now and changing things over the road. I think had that started back then, a lot of that stuff would have been changed by now. And it really is unfortunate that a lot of it hasn't changed. But give me your feedback. Reach out to me on social media. If you see the show notes, I always have the social media links in there. So go make sure you follow me on Facebook, follow the show on Instagram, and let me know about any changes that you're seeing in your area, any changes that you think should be seen in your area. And I want to know because, like I said, I'm not everywhere all at once, and a lot of these things aren't talked about in the news. And so it's great to know what changes are actually taking place and what isn't taking place and, what's all a bunch of bullshit. So go follow the show, reach out to me, say hi, share the episodes, please, because that's how people know more about what's actually happening and what isn't happening. And as always, I appreciate your support so very much. Make sure you also go to the savealifeevent.com if you're in the Whidbey Island area. September 30th is when we are doing the event that is going to bring the cast and crew of Stranger at Home to Oak Harbor, Washington. They're going to be doing a private film screening of that film, a cast Q&A afterwards, and the San Diego Veterans Coalition is going to be doing an amazing keynote. And it's going to be an incredible event. So if you are in the area, you can RSVP on the website. If you're not in the area, still share it with your friends, family. We're arranging a virtual event too, if there is enough interest in it. So thank you. I hope you had an incredible Memorial Day weekend. I hope you took the time to reflect, and I hope you took some time to take care of you. Until next time, see you guys next week.
Thank you for taking the time to listen in today. With your support, we are able to increase awareness of the mental health issues affecting service members and veterans today, with the goal of creating positive change. If you got value from this episode, please take 30 seconds to subscribe and share this episode within your own network. Until next time, remember, your story matters, your mental health matters, and your story doesn't end here.